Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome to this webinar. We're going to start within the next minute. But a warm welcome to all of you. I hope you're all well installed with a nice mug of coffee or tea and ready for the next hour with us. And with that, I am really happy to welcome you to this WHO and UNICEF webinar, where we are launching the public consultation on indicators to monitor climate resilient WASH. My name is Fiona Gore, joining you from WHO in Geneva, Switzerland, from the GLAAS team. I am here today with a smashing group of people for this webinar for the next hour. If we could go to the next slide, please. In 2024, WHO and UNICEF launched a review to identify indicators for enhanced national and global monitoring of climate resilient WASH. Now, the results will inform future global monitoring by WHO, UNICEF, and the Joint Monitoring Programme for Water Supply and Sanitation and Hygiene, and the UN Water Global Analysis and Assessment of Sanitation and Drinking Water, namely the JMP and GLAAS programs. WHO and UNICEF held global webinars back in July 2024 to launch the review. And in February 25, we presented initial findings from the review of existing frameworks and evidence. We're working very closely with some academic partners who we will be introducing to you very shortly. Now, this third webinar this morning will provide an update on the review process and officially launch the public consultation on the emerging long list of potential indicators for monitoring climate resilient WASH. Next slide, please. A few housekeepings. Please use the chat, and we really look forward to your active participation for the next 56 minutes with us this morning. So ask your question, make comments, provide us feedback. We'll be providing you with links, and we are recording this webinar, and we'll be providing also to all registries the recording and the slides through on the website. Next slide, please. So as I said, we've got an exciting agenda this morning, and I'll be happy to then pass over to my colleague Rick Johnson from the WHO JMP team. After Rick, we'll be passing over to Professor Barbara Evans from the University of Leeds, who's been leading the work on this review and the indicators, before passing over to my colleague Tom Slaymaker about the next steps and closing. So we're here together for the next 55 minutes. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat and tell us where you're joining us from. And we really look forward to your active participation, and we welcome you very much. And thank you for registering. Thank you for your interest. And we really hope you'll enjoy the next hour. So with that, I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Rick Johnston, to talk about the work that we've been doing. Thank you. Rick, over to you.
Thanks, Fiona. And I wanted to start by introducing members of the JMP and GLAAS teams on the next slide. So I'm Rick Johnston here in WHO in Geneva. I lead the WHO side of the Joint Monitoring Programme, while my colleague Tom Slaymaker leads the UNICEF side. I'm going to explain in a few minutes just what the JMP and GLAAS programs do. But the GLAAS team is led by Fiona Gore, who just opened the meeting. She, along with WHO colleagues Marina Takane and Betsy Engebretson, are involved in this climate resilience work, along with Janet Atim, the GLAAS focal point at UNICEF. And you'll hear from Tom later in this webinar. On the next slide, you can see that the WHO-UNICEF Joint Monitoring Programme is a joint program between WHO and UNICEF for global monitoring of drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene. It was established in 1990, so it previously reported on the MDGs, and now we are responsible for global monitoring of the SDG targets related to water, sanitation, and hygiene, WASH. So the JMP has, since its beginning, reported on WASH in households. And since the start of the SDGs, we've established new global databases on WASH in schools and WASH in healthcare facilities. And for all three settings, the JMP collects, compiles, and reports national data on the outputs and outcomes. How many people, how many schools, how many healthcare facilities have access to or are using different levels of WASH services. And we produce updates for each of these settings every 2 years. So in odd years, we produce reports on WASH in households. We're currently preparing the 2025 report, which will come out in a few months. And last year, we produced our 4th reports on WASH in schools and WASH in healthcare facilities. You can find out more about JMP's work on our website, washdata.org. Now, the GLAAS team, on the next slide, GLAAS stands for the UN Water Global Analysis and Assessment of Sanitation and Drinking Water. It was first piloted in 2008, and now it's in its 7th round of global reporting. It was originally developed by WHO and is now co-managed by WHO and UNICEF. And if the JMP is responsible for monitoring outputs and outcomes, the GLAAS initiative looks more at the enabling environment, at the inputs and processes. For each GLAAS cycle, the team circulates a country survey, which covers key elements of WASH systems, finance, monitoring, governance, and human resources that contribute to countries making progress towards SDG 6. The GLAAS team also supports country-led processes and seeks to identify bottlenecks as well as drivers of progress. The current questionnaire was circulated last year, and the GLAAS team is busily compiling responses now from over 100 countries and is working to produce a report which will come out later this year. These reports additionally contribute towards the monitoring of the SDG means of implementation targets, 6.A and 6.B. And besides this, in recent years, the GLAAS team has expanded monitoring of financial flows in the WASH sector through the TrackFin and now WASH accounts programs. All of this is done with a wide range of partners, and you can find out more information at the website glaas.who.int. Now, on to the topic of climate resilience. So climate resilience in WASH services, the topic of our day. On the next slide, it's relevant to both the GLAAS and the JMP teams, if you think about inputs and processes leading to outputs and outcomes. So accordingly, we've been working together to jointly conduct a review of climate resilience in WASH with a special focus on monitoring. The review aims to identify frameworks and indicators, data collection opportunities, and existing data that describe the links between climate resilience and WASH. And to do this, we advertised for partners and ended up selecting a consortium of research partners in early 2024. That team includes the University of Leeds, Bristol, Oxford, and the University of Technology, Sydney. We also have a technical working group with a lot of geographic diversity and expertise in different areas related to monitoring, to climate resilience, and WASH, who help us to provide inputs and review outputs from the review. The review focuses on areas where GLAAS and JMP could aim to do future monitoring at a global level, but the review also draws on experiences from other types of monitoring, such as project scale or local scale monitoring, where some concepts might have relevance to the global teams, but the level of detail could be too high to be feasible for global monitoring. We're committed to making this a very transparent process, so there are multiple opportunities to engage with stakeholders. This webinar is the 3rd that we've held so far, and we're using it to launch a public consultation on an emerging set of candidate indicators. And we'll be continuing to share news about this initiative through global events, conferences, trainings, webinars, and our website. This is very much focused on WASH, but there is also a much wider process going on linked to the Global Goal on Adaptation, which has set out a number of targets for climate resilience, including target 9.A on water and sanitation. On the next slide, you can see the thematic targets from the Global Goal on Adaptation that was adopted at COP28 in the UAE in December 23. It includes these 6 thematic targets to be met by 2030. They're sometimes called paragraph 9 targets. And the first of these is on water and sanitation. So target 9A calls for significantly reducing climate-induced water scarcity, for enhancing climate resilience to water-related hazards towards a climate-resilient water supply, climate-resilient sanitation, and towards access to safe and affordable potable water for all. In addition to Target 9A on water and sanitation, there are 5 other thematic targets on food and agricultural production, on climate change and health impacts that are related to climate change, ecosystems and biodiversity, resilience of infrastructure and human settlements, and poverty eradication and livelihoods. Water and sanitation do have links with all of those targets as well. So that's paragraph 9. And on the next slide, you can see the following paragraph goes on to set out 4 targets related to an adaptation policy cycle, sometimes called dimensional targets. And these are the kinds of activities that are necessary to achieve those 6 thematic targets under paragraph 9. So there are explicit targets for the assessment of impacts and vulnerabilities and risks, as well as for setting national adaptation plans and implementing them, supported all along by systems for monitoring, evaluation, and learning. Now, the UNFCCC is hosting a process to develop a set of indicators that could be used to measure and monitor these global goal on adaptation targets, both the thematic targets and these adaptation cycle targets. But this is a very big process with several rounds of public inputs and groups of experts that are reviewing thousands of indicators that have been proposed. They're aiming to produce a manageable set of no more than 100 indicators that can be presented and agreed by the COP30 to be held in Belém in November this year. And remember, those 100 indicators need to cover 6 thematic targets and also these 4 adaptation cycle targets. So it's quite ambitious. So the JMP and GLAAS process is much more narrowly focused on WASH, and it's moving in parallel to this broader global goal on adaptation process. And we're making sure that our reviews and our lists of candidate indicators feed into that UNFCCC process along the way. But they are separate processes. Next, I can show a timeline of the JMP and GLAAS review. So here's a summary of the steps we've followed so far and what's planned for the coming months. We engaged the academic consortium of research partners in March last year, and shortly after, we constituted a technical working group of about 20 people from around the world with different types of experiences and expertise. We held a kickoff meeting with this technical group in July, followed by a first set of public webinars launching the project. Then, from July through the end of last year, the research partners conducted a series of reviews, both of peer-reviewed literature and gray literature and existing frameworks, which were also informed by public calls. These findings were reviewed by our technical working group in December and shared in a public webinar in February this year. Several weeks ago, we held a second technical working group meeting to review the long list of indicators which resulted from the reviews, and today we're launching a public consultation on that long list of indicators. We will then spend the next several months reviewing this long list and working to develop it into a short list of proposed indicators that could be used by the JMP and GLAAS teams for global monitoring. And today, we want to ask you for your feedback on that long list to help us in this process. We should have a third working group meeting to finalize the short list of proposed indicators by September, and that'll be followed by a third public consultation. Then we expect to pilot the shortlisted indicators with interested countries, and about a year from now, hopefully, we'll have some practical experiences in hand that we can use to further refine the shortlisted indicators if needed. As you can see, it's an iterative process where the JMP and GLAAS teams work with the research partners to develop something, which is then reviewed by the technical working group and put out for public consultation before moving on to the next step. And we're about halfway through the process of developing and piloting these new indicators. So on the next slide, you can see that the review has already produced what we're calling a scoping document. And this lays out definitions and clarifies what's in scope of the review and what's not. That's up on our website. We'll be sharing a link in the chat. By the way, you might already be familiar with the Sanitation and Water for All definition of climate resilient WASH. This has very much influenced our reviews, so the definitions and terms are well aligned. But the SWA has made more of a normative definition of climate resilience, and we're looking for a monitoring approach for actionable indicators to track climate resilience. Second, there's a newly produced discussion paper which aims to summarize the key concepts used in the WASH sector when framing climate resilience for the purpose of monitoring, to summarize key concepts drawn from resources used to conceptualize and monitor climate resilience in other WASH adjacent sectors like health or education or energy, to present a review of evidence supporting indicators of climate resilient WASH that are being used or at least are being proposed for the WASH sector, and to reflect on the implications of all the above for development of new indicators for the WASH sector. So these reviews have led to the drafting of a long list of candidate indicators, which we're inviting you to review today. You can access all of these files on our website. There's the link in the chat. You can also sign up for our mailing list to receive information and updates as the project advances. So in just a minute, I'm going to turn over the floor to our research partner to describe the long list of indicators. But on the next slide, I wanted to share a brief summary of the review findings so far. First, we found that there are many frameworks for climate resilience, both within and outside the WASH sector. There do seem to be particularly a lot within the WASH sector. We're pretty prolific compared to other sectors. And by reviewing these frameworks, we have found a lot of attributes, adaptation actions, proposed indicators that could be developed into indicators for climate resilient WASH, over 500, 550 of these. In addition to this review of frameworks, we've made reviews of the literature, both peer-reviewed and gray, and have come up with another 1,000 indicators or so that have been proposed by someone, somewhere, as being related to climate resilience in WASH. But honestly, some of these aren't very good indicators, or they're not even indicators, they're more statements. Stay on this slide. And for many of them, there's limited evidence that they're good at predicting climate resilience. We have found some good examples from other sectors, particularly the health sector, about how to express indicators for service outcomes and user satisfaction, and we want to learn from those examples. So altogether, we've been able to use these reviews to propose a subset of indicators for adaptation actions, attributes, service outcomes, and user satisfaction with some degree of confidence. But the level of evidence supporting these is pretty variable. We've made a first round of synthesis and shortening from the over 1,500 proposed indicators or attributes or actions that came out of the reviews. We've distilled these now to about a long list of just over 400 indicators to consider as candidates for monitoring climate resilient WASH. And that's where we're asking for your help. So on the next slide, we're launching this public consultation today to give you a chance to review this long list of over 400 candidate indicators. We'd really love to have your feedback on these indicators to help us prioritize among them. We're also interested to see if there are gaps that need to be filled. Maybe there are some important aspects of climate resilient WASH that haven't been covered in the frameworks or the evidence review conducted. And we also welcome your proposals for new indicators to fill these gaps. But before proposing new indicators, please first do check that they're not already in the long list, because it's that long list is already pretty long. This public consultation will be open online for just over 2 weeks through the 9th of May. And if you scan that QR code you see, it'll take you to our webpage, and you won't have to type in the very long URL that you see on the screen. Or you could just click the link that's in your chat box. With that, let me turn over the floor to Professor Barbara Evans at the University of Leeds, who is going to describe the long list in more detail.
Thanks so much, Rick. Welcome everybody from my side as well. And I was just really enjoying looking at the chat and seeing the incredible geographic spread of participants in this meeting. That's really exciting to see, because obviously we've been working at a sort of theoretical global level, and now this part of the consultation is really to try and link into your real experiences at country level. So this is very exciting for us. The work that we've been doing to support JMP and GLAAS, and next slide please, James, has been carried out by a large academic team. And as usual, as I always say, I'm the professor, so I get to talk, but actually, of course, the work has been done by these amazing people that you see on the slide here. Apologies, Lily doesn't have a photograph, but she does really exist. So I want to particularly thank Lily King, James Wallace, Kelly Moon, and Anisha Nithawan, who've been doing a lot of the groundwork that I'm going to present just now. Next slide, please. So just to remind you of something that Rick said, before you look at the long list, we would really encourage you to look at the scoping and definitions document and the discussion document. The scoping and definitions document describes the universe that we're interested in within this project. And I'm just going to highlight some of the aspects of that scoping to help you get your bearings before you hear from James about the actual long list. So if we go to the next slide, James, in the scoping document, we have reviewed a very broad range of ways in which people think about climate resilience in the WASH sector. And we ended up defining the scope of our project in the way you see here on this slide. Before I go through this slide step by step, just to highlight a couple of things. The first thing is that the blue dashed line represents the boundary of what we are interested in this project. So we are fundamentally interested in any dimensions of climate resilience that relate specifically to the outcomes that you see on the right-hand side of this diagram here. So the service functioning and the user experience, which relates specifically to water supply, sanitation, and the practicing of key hygiene behaviours. There's very much an equity dimension here. You'll notice that we're interested in the equitable distribution of user experience under climate stresses right across the board. So all societal groups would be in play in terms of understanding how these effects play out. Also, I'd like to highlight that we are interested in uncertain climate shocks, events, trends and stresses. So not just rapid onset climate shock, but also slow changes in climate conditions over time. So for example, prolonged drought or simply decadal declines in rainfall would be in scope. If we look at this diagram, it's a little bit like a logic flow. On the right-hand side, we see the outcomes of interest, so the service functioning and the user experience. And then we're interested in looking for indicators for some of the contributory dimensions of WASH that might lead to good outcomes. So if you go to the next slide, James, please. The first area we're interested in on the left are adaptation actions that might be taken by national or subnational governments. So these are policy, institutional, regulatory and finance decisions or instruments and we're looking for things which are likely and have some evidence ideally likely to promote good water service functioning, good sanitation service functioning, good hygiene experiences for users under climate stresses. So the items that fall under this category are aligned with paragraph 10 of the GGA goals that Rick just explained to you. The next area that we're interested in are adaptation actions by service providers, adaptation actions taken by users, and adaptation actions taken by people that work in the supply chain around hygiene supplies particularly. So these are less at the policy level and more at the implementation level. So decisions, policies, approaches and actions which are taken by these key actors. The next area that we're interested in are adaptation actions that relate specifically to two key adjacent areas to WASH, but they are so significant that we've included them in the scope of this project. One, of course, is around water resources and land management, and the second is to do with coordination with solid waste and drainage. The water resources side is relevant both to water supply and sanitation. The solid waste and drainage aspects are, of course, relevant to sanitation. All of those taken together are liable to influence the next area, which are the physical attributes of infrastructure and the attributes of water resources. So essentially here we're looking at the physical systems which deliver our water supply, sanitation and hygiene services. So in this category, you're looking at things like the materials which are used, the specific designs which are adopted, the specific ways in which systems are operated. So those are the physical attributes of the infrastructure. And then at the right-hand side, we are, of course, interested in the service functioning. So essentially the extent to which service functioning is maintained or interrupted for short or long periods of time under a climate stress. And finally, we're interested in how users experience all of this together. So essentially here we're interested in not just the physical flow of water from a tap, for example, but also the extent to which users have good knowledge about how to cope, they have early warning, or they experience distress or distress as a consequence of climate effects influencing the performance of their infrastructure. What you will notice in this diagram is that around the edge there are a large number of things which are very important. I mean, societal or community resilience at large is very important. And we're not saying it's not important to the resilience of water and sanitation and hygiene services, but what we are saying is that those are things which fall outside the scope of JMP and WASH and JMP and GLAAS global monitoring. So this is the framework, and you'll see us return to this time and again when you come to look at the materials which we've presented in terms of the long list on the website. You will see this picture again and again, and you will see the titles of these areas of interest, adaptation, actions and attributes. Those will come up again and again. This is how we've organized the way we're thinking about potential indicators for climate resilient WASH. And with that, I'm going to hand over to, before that, just to introduce you to, so we've talked about the discussion document and I've talked about the scoping document. What we're going to hear about now are specifically the long list of indicators. Now, the long list of indicators is presented in two ways. There's an Excel file and there's an interactive PowerPoint file. I need you to understand, or we want you to understand that the information in these two resources is exactly the same. We've simply organized it using two different tools because we recognize that some people like to use Excel files. Some people would find working through an interactive PowerPoint more easy. So we've just offered you two ways of engaging with this very long and complicated list. So I am now going to hand on to James, and he's going to introduce you to these two tools.
Thanks, Barbara. Yeah, so I'm going to talk you through the two tools Barbara just described. The first one of these is the Excel version of the long list. So these are, you'll be able to find these via the links that have been provided. Once you open the documents, you'll be greeted with a screen similar to this, where we have some tabs along the bottom, and you can navigate between those, and I'll show you those as we move along. So the first one is the master sheet notes. And what we can see here is the theoretical framework that Barbara just described, but this version is color-coded and the colors match some of the tables, which I'm going to show you now, just to make it a bit easier on the eye and make it a bit more kind of easy to navigate through. So the next tab I will show you is the summary pivot table, which is this magenta tab here. So we'll click on that one. And then here we have a summary table, which summarizes all of the information that is in the indicator master sheet tab, which is this yellow one here. So along the top, we have the components of the framework, which are those colored boxes on the framework that Barbara just described. So those are on the top here. And then down the side, we have the service change for each of the WASH subsectors. So we've got sanitation here, water supply here, hygiene here, and the whole WASH system here. And then the numbers in the table correspond to the amount of indicators which fit into each category. So, for example, we've got 18 indicators which are attributes of the WASH system, and we've categorized them as sanitation user interface, capture, and containment. So this, again, is just summarizing all of the information that's in the next tab I'm going to show you, which is the indicator master sheet. And this will be the kind of primary location in which you'll be reviewing the indicators, if you choose the Excel version, of course. So there are several columns here. I'll go through each of these one by one so we're clear on what the information is in each of these columns. So the first one, column A, is the reference number, and this just follows a very simple pattern. We've got LL for long list, and then a number after that. The next column is whether the indicator pertains to a particular WASH subsector. So that could be sanitation, hygiene, or water supply. And then we have the next column, which is the attribute or action or outcome. And this is the desired outcome of the indicator. So this follows a pattern where we have climate resilient and then the position along the service chain for the subsector. So for example, this is climate resilient sanitation user interface and capturing containment for this first one. The next one we have is whether the indicator is specific to a particular climate hazard. The next one is the framework component, which are those colored boxes, which we just looked at earlier. The next one is the objective of the indicator. And then this bolded one in column H is the candidate indicator itself. So that's kind of the most important thing to be looking at in this table. The next one is whether the indicator has any measurements or targets. And then the final 5 columns are related to the source material or reference material for the indicators. So the first one is the source. So that the indicator could have come from the review processes, which are described in the discussion paper. A consortium suggested, which were often suggested as a result of a gap in the literature. Or they could have come from academic and grey literature outside of the review processes that were described in the discussion paper. So the next column R, is whether the indicator has any evidence. So we can see a few examples here where we've got one with evidence, one that's been derived from evidence, and then one with no evidence. If the indicator does have evidence, then in column S, we have coded whether it's qualitative or quantitative evidence. And then the column T is if the indicator came from a review, then there's a unique reference number for each of the reviews that we conducted. And again, they're in the discussion paper, so you'll be able to follow which of the reviews is which. The final column is column U, and this contains any reference material or source material for each of the indicators. So you can copy and paste that into your internet service and have a look at that information in more detail if you so wish. So after the master sheet along the bottom, we've got several other pivot tables, which again summarize the data in the master sheet. I'll go to the sanitation one just as an example. So this is just another way of looking at the indicators. So you can see here there are these plus icons. So this table here is organized by the service chain, and then these numbers here in this column represent the amount of indicators in that group. So you can expand these groups by clicking the plus icon. So we'll do that. And then we can see the indicator group further broken down by the indicator objectives. And again, we can expand these groups by clicking the plus icons to see the indicators themselves. And again, this is just another way of looking at the indicators. And we've got the same kinds of pivot tables for water supply, sanitation, hygiene, and the whole WASH system. Okay, so as Barbara described, looking at a big long list of indicators in an Excel version isn't ideal for everybody. So we wanted to create a more interesting or engaging way of engaging with the long list. So we landed on a PowerPoint version, an interactive PowerPoint version, which is this alternative way of looking at the long list. And this is this document I'm showing you now. When you open it up, you'll see this. You'll see the screen. So it's very important now that you click this icon here, highlighted in red, which then opens up the slideshow kind of viewing option to view the PowerPoint. And you click that one, and that gives you a kind of immersive experience, but also makes the links ensure the links work when you're clicking through it. So the next slide is a navigation guidance slide. So here there's a little 5-minute video where I describe how this document works. But as I'm here now, I can just quickly show you. So once you've watched the video, you can then click on this icon here, which is a hyperlink, which links to the conceptual framework. So you can click on this link. And then again, we see the conceptual framework, which Barbara just described and I just showed you. And this is kind of your main menu for navigating through the long list via this option. So you can click on all of these blue hyperlinks, and that will take you to another screen, which has another menu and another list of indicators. And that's how you can navigate through. So say, for example, we are interested in adaptation actions by national or subnational governments. We can click on this blue hyperlink here. And this takes us to another menu. And here we can see we have the indicators split by the WASH subsectors. So we've got water supply, sanitation, hygiene, and the whole WASH system. And then they're further split by policy, regulation, institutions, and finance. And this is just particularly for the national and subnational governments option, but for the other components of the framework, they're kind of split slightly differently. So say, for example, we're interested in indicators relating to policy and sanitation systems. We can click on this link here, highlighted in red, and then we're presented with another table. So just to be clear, that if you had the Excel version and you filtered by policy and sanitation systems, you'd see the same information here. We've just extracted this information and presented it in this way to make it maybe a bit more visually appealing. So say, for example, we're interested in a particular indicator, maybe we're interested in LL62. So that's this top one here. We click on that link, that blue link there, highlighted in red. And then we're presented with another kind of summary page, which summarizes all the information related to this indicator. And again, this is just the same information that's in the Excel version, just extracted to this sheet to present the information in maybe a more visually appealing way. So we're at this page now, and maybe we want to comment on the indicator or leave some feedback. So there's an option along the bottom there. You can see the hyperlink. You can just click on that, highlighted in red now. This takes you to a website where we can leave some feedback. So there are two boxes to fill out. The first one is the indicator that you wish to provide feedback on. So for our example here, we were interested in LL62, so you can pick LL62 from the drop-down menu. And then for option 2, you leave any feedback you want to leave behind. So you just type that in the box, click done, and then return back to the document and continue reviewing indicators. So those are the two options. I'll now hand over to Barbara, who will give some more information about the candidate indicators that are in the long list. Thanks.
Thank you so much, James. So just to give you a little bit of a flavour, you saw a couple of the indicators there as James was going through the Excel file and the PowerPoint. But just to go down a little bit further and say, what are you looking at here? Now, Rick already pointed out that a lot of these are not yet indicators. And at this stage, we're not in the business of really worrying too much about the syntax and the specific data requirements for each of the candidates that we'd like to eventually include in the shortlist. What we're really interested in are areas which are important to measure. However, because we developed the long list based on a review process, there are some interesting things to think about as you're looking at the indicators. So one of the things that we have got on the long list are 174 indicators which came directly from existing WASH frameworks. These were indicators which have been proposed by others. Some of them have been proposed by UNICEF and WHO, some by other individuals or organisations in the WASH sector. And where they aligned with our conceptual framework, we have dropped them straight into the long list. So, for example, LL175 is an example of an indicator which is already included in the GLAAS 2024-25 survey instrument, which was used by the GLAAS team earlier this year to collect data for the next round of GLAAS reporting. So that's national adaptation plans address climate risks to water supply. That's just an example. There's another one here, LL46, which comes from a GWP UNICEF framework, and is also in the Climate Resilient WASH Strategic Framework. And this is about early warning systems, technology and associated policies and procedures designed to predict and mitigate the impacts of climate change, account for impacts on WASH services. Now, those of you who are indicator specialists will recognise that that's not yet an indicator, but it's clearly something that might be useful to measure or observe. Going to the next slide, we also have some indicators which are amended somewhat because we felt that a lot of frameworks and a lot of the documentation that we looked at had suggested these things were important. So we considered whether we could adapt some of those ideas and include them in the list. So for example, here's one. I mentioned that we're interested in the relationship between drainage and solid waste. So here, LL349 is about solid waste management actions by users, which would reduce risks of climate change related failures. And the thing we're interested in is whether those are included in sanitation behaviour change campaigns. Similarly, LL460 is about the proportion of menstruators that have access to safe, secure and private facilities to wash and dry their menstrual hygiene products and cloths. This is an example of an indicator. It's clearly something important, but it's not yet climate specific. So it's in the list because we know it's an important area, but it's not yet been developed into a climate specific indicator. Going to the next slide, there are some existing indicators in a range of frameworks which were provided to us, and some of you probably were part of the very generous groups of people who provided us with references. Some of these we haven't included. Some, for example, R1 at the top here, expected total duration of solid waste collection interruption period according to climate change scenarios. That's an example of an indicator from a solid waste management framework, but which is dependent on the development of these climate change scenarios. So it's not specific, it's not general enough to be used in global monitoring. Obviously, we wouldn't have used it in that form, but we might have amended it to be relevant to sanitation services, for example. Some indicators were excluded because they weren't actually indicators, but actions. So this is one about assessing cost effectiveness. It's clear that cost effectiveness is important, but it's not clear that this particular statement is a useful topic to be included as an area for indicator. And some of them were too specific to the sector that they were taken from. Just if you're unclear about this sector issue, we reviewed a lot of indicators proposed not just in the wash sector, but in related or adjacent or similar sectors, including transport and solid waste, as I've said, and health. If we go to the next slide, another thing that we've had to think about, and we haven't addressed and completely dealt with in the long list as yet, but this is something for you to bear in mind as you're looking at the long list, is the balance between climate specificity and climate relevance. We have this interesting problem in the wash sector that good wash is something that we probably want to measure, and good wash is probably more climate resilient than poor quality wash services. But some things may be so pertinent to climate change that we may include them specifically as indicators that we want to measure because we're interested in climate resilience. So an example is non-revenue water. Non-revenue water is clearly a good thing for water systems and water service providers to be aware of and to measure. It's also very, very useful and important in a water stressed situation. So we have included some candidate indicators here, 475 and 476, which relate to non-revenue water. But in the tools we've provided for you to give us feedback, we would be interested to hear whether you, what are your views on these non-climate specific but climate relevant indicators. And to the next slide. One thing to bear in mind is that WASH has some particular challenges compared to some other sectors. So we looked at a lot of indicators from the transport sector, for example, where often there's a binary distinction between a railway is running or it's not running. We are aware that some of the outcome indicators for WASH may need to be more nuanced, and we have included in the long list some of the recent work done by colleagues, particularly on developing the QALY, which is an indicator of the quality of life year health indicator, Ian Ross at the London School of Hygiene's developed a sanitation quality indicator, which we've taken into account. And there are also indicators of water stress. The HWISE and IWISE frameworks are an example of this. So we do need to think quite hard, and we welcome your feedback on how we deal with these sort of ladders of quality of service, if you like, at the service delivery and user experience end. Going to the next slide, just to flag up also that eventually we will be interested in temporality. So essentially, indicators, some of these indicators reflect more short-term effects, so extreme shocks compared to long-run, slow onset shocks, but also even a shock, if whether it's short or long-term, will have immediate short-term manifestations and longer-term manifestations. So eventually, we may be looking at developing some indicators that are more nuanced and more laddered, as for example, this example from the Measuring the Climate Resilience of Health Systems framework. Currently, the long list, we don't go into this much detail in the long list, but as you're looking at the long list, if you have thoughts about how we might distinguish between reactive and forward-looking resilience by using this type of framework, please do provide feedback on that topic. Next slide, please. So just to remind you, there are lots of things to look at. To give you context, we have the scoping document and the discussion document. In order to look at the long list, we've offered you the Excel and the interactive PowerPoint. And to give you feedback, there are 3 mechanisms you can use. On the website, there's a standalone SurveyMonkey. So if you've looked at all the resources and you want to just walk through a structured way of giving us feedback on any aspects of what you've looked at, I would recommend using the standalone SurveyMonkey, which you can connect to from the website. If you're interested in individual indicators, I would suggest that you use the SurveyMonkey, which is embedded in the interactive PowerPoint that James showed you earlier. And if you don't want to deal with any of that, and if the idea of a SurveyMonkey turns your heart to stone, you're very welcome to email your feedback to us directly using the email address on the website. And with that, I will hand back to Tom, I think.
Okay, thank you very much, Barbara and James, and to everybody else for your inputs. That's quite a lot of information, but as you can see, we have tried to structure it as clearly as possible in order to make it easy for others to engage with it and to provide feedback. There are those 3 different options on the last slide. If you could just move back to that last slide, I think that's useful. And I just wanted to give an opportunity for those online, if they have any questions, either about the conceptual framework, which we are using to organise this review, or the particular way in which the long list is structured. Of course, the long list is structured in relation to the conceptual framework, but if there is anything that is unclear, please let us know in the chat so that we can try to clarify. So type your questions into the chat and then we will try to respond in the next 5 to 10 minutes. I see that there is already a question coming up from Ananya. Ananya Ghoshal. One is approximately how many indicators are we looking towards shortlisting? That's a great question, and there is no precise number that we are aiming for. I think you will have seen in the presentation at the beginning the reference to the Global Goal on Adaptation, and there is an aspiration to come up with no more than 100 indicators which could be used to monitor all of the different targets under the Global Goal on Adaptation, which includes the one relating to water and sanitation. For our purposes, for the JMP and GLAAS, it is possible for us to consider a larger number of indicators that we would measure and monitor. And what we want to do is to review the different elements of the framework. So the actions, the attributes, the service functioning, the user experience, and we want to try to identify a small number of indicators that could potentially be used for national and for global monitoring in those spheres. And then we will look at them together and we will have a discussion about which of those are most suitable for being aggregated for the purposes of global monitoring. So the answer is a small number, but we're not going to give you an exact number because we want to hear from you on what you think is important and also what you think is feasible. And then are there any specific areas within the WASH umbrella that we want to focus on? Clearly, adaptation and resilience is the main focus. You will see the different dimensions of adaptation and resilience set out in the scoping paper and also in the conceptual framework. There is also a very strong focus on equity. I see gender is highlighted there. That's just one aspect of equity, but there are many others as well that we should be considering. One thing that is very challenging when it comes to monitoring is understanding the different ways in which geographic areas or populations are affected by climate change, which can be highly context specific. So if we have any examples of work that has been done to understand the differential impacts on areas and populations, then we would really like to hear about those and we would like to learn from your experience. So please do share your experience. I'm sure many of you have been trying to measure and monitor climate resilience at different levels. You may have been doing it at a local level, at a project level. You may have been doing it at a national level. We want to hear all of those different types of experience so that we can try to learn from them and we can try to come up with something that is going to be useful and relevant for all different types of contexts around the world. I see we have a couple of other questions coming in. Can feedback be given on behalf of organizations or only by individuals? We would welcome both types. So all feedback is welcome. If you are representing an organization, then please do record that in your feedback so that we can see where the feedback is coming from. And if you are speaking on behalf of a wider organization or a network, please do let us know. That would be very, very useful. There's a question from Ayo Bavideli. What about insufficient climate data that would enable effective implementation of climate WASH resilience? Very good question. I think in many parts of the world, we do not have as much information as we would like to have about how the climate is changing and how that is impacting WASH services. I think this is a general problem. And if you look at the long list, you will see references to the type of information that we would like to have and the type of information that we would like governments to be collecting more systematically in order to support efforts to make WASH services more climate resilient. So I think we want to hear from you on both of those things. You know, what are the types of information we need to have? And also, what are the major gaps that you see in your own work? And how do we see opportunities to address those? Okay, and a last one here from Nohal. Some main WASH indicators in countries with emergencies would be considered in the WASH climate resilient indicators. Again, a very good point. Are there certain types of indicators that are going to be more important in the context of emergencies rather than in development settings, or should we be considering the same types of indicators across both settings? That is something that we will be looking into. Of course, the types of data and the amount of data that we have in emergency settings and in development settings may also vary. So that is something that we need to take into account. And also the temporality, which Barbara was talking about earlier, will be another important consideration. And then from Sujoy, the process adopted to establish indicators at the global and national level is urgent and pressing, but including these indicators into national plans for implementation will take time. Of course, this is something which we will be working on for many years. So the first process is to establish the long list and then come up with a short list. And related to that, we will be looking for countries and partners who are interested to pilot test the collection of these indicators at scale. So as soon as we have a short list, we want to be testing them out and refining them and improving that short list based on the experience of collecting them. So we want to start that as soon as possible towards the end of this year, so that we can start to analyze the data and understand what it is actually telling us about progress on climate resilience. Okay, so I tried to quickly respond to the questions in the chat. I see that Barbara has also been typing. Barbara, did you have any more rapid responses you wanted to make to the comments?
No, just the one thing to emphasize, the question from Ananya about which elements of the framework to focus on. I think there's two answers. One is please use your expertise. So if you only feel that you're equipped to talk about user experiences of hygiene, then give us your feedback in that area. You know, and all the feedback mechanisms will give you choices, so you don't need to spend time on things you don't have views on. But I just do want to emphasize that part of the purpose of the framework was to help us to make sure that we are looking at all of the dimensions which tend to promote or which might tend to promote climate resilience. So in the end, I think our intention in the shortlist is to have some candidate indicators in each of those categories. So we're hoping that between all of you on this call and all the other people who are going to engage with this material, we'll find expertise across all of those categories.
Very good. Thank you very much. So let's go to the final slide then. So we're not expecting you to review all of these indicators. Please take a look at whichever indicators are of most interest to you, provide whatever feedback you would like to provide. The three channels for providing feedback have been set out very clearly. You will find the links on the project website. So there's a QR code here which will take you there directly, and there is the URL at the bottom, which can be copied and pasted into your browser. We will leave the public consultation open until the 9th of May. And then after that, we will take all of the feedback that we've received from the public consultation. We will share that with our technical working group and with the academic consortium who is supporting the review. And then we will work together to come up with a shortlist. And then we will hold another public consultation towards the end of this year on that shortlist of indicators. So you will have another opportunity to look at the shortlist and provide your feedback on that. Before we try to make some final recommendations that can be taken up and pilot tested in different countries around the world. So that is our process. I hope it is clear. We really do look forward to hearing from you. Every time we launch a call for inputs, we receive something new that we weren't expecting. So we very much value these inputs, and we will try to make sure that all of the inputs are incorporated into our review, and then we will post the results of the different outputs of the review on the website. If you would like to receive inputs, updates, and you are not already on the mailing list, then you can sign up to receive updates on the website, and here is the link to do that. But as we are now at time, I just want to thank all of our presenters, and especially Barbara and James and the wider academic consortium that has been supporting WHO and UNICEF JMP GLAAS teams, but also particularly to thank all of you for your time, and to thank you in advance for your inputs to the public consultation. And with that, I will close this webinar. Thank you very much.